A piping hot cup of coffee first thing in the morning is what I need to kickstart my day. But if you want a cup of coffee, you would go to what? A barista or a coffee day? But that's not the overdrive way. We've come all the way down to Chikmagalur for our hot cup of coffee. We've come to the place where coffee was first grown in India to retrace the steps and live the lifestyle of those early pioneering coffee planters.
And boy did those early pioneers have it rough. They did live in plush bungalows, not unlike our modern day dwellings, but with the benefit of more servants than you could afford. After tiffin, they would head out to hunt tigers, bison, and just about every other four-legged creature in the forest. They drank coffee, lots of it. But they also had to ride horses or trek through leech-infested forests. And that couldn't have been very easy.
You know what they say? They say every bean of coffee has an adventure in it. It tells the story of those early pioneering planters, those people who came down here, braved harsh, inhospitable conditions, wild animals, malaria, to set up those initial plantations that gave jobs to thousands of people and gave us the brew that we all love so dearly. Now, if we're going to retrace the path of those early planters, we need something that has go-anywhere ability. We need something that's luxurious, that's comfortable, because we are a bit soft these days. And we need something that is new. We need the Toyota Fortuner.
Wrong! I think the Toyota Fortuner is the pretender to the throne. The throne that's been occupied by the Mitsubishi Pajero for the last 3 decades. Ever since I've been a kid running around in my shorts, the only SUV I could remember is the Pajero. It is the true pioneer. It's a double shot of espresso injected straight into your vein.
Hang on a minute. If the Fortuner is the cappuccino, and that is the double espresso, then this is a tall glass of cold coffee. It's cool in that old-fashioned American way, and as you can see, it's huge.
Hang on now. Yes, we have one more SUV with us. Or to put it in its place, a soft-roader. And you'll be wondering what the Nissan XTrail is doing here. After all, it doesn't have the hardcore credentials of the others. And yet we brought it along. To give a sense of perspective to what an SUV, freed from the shackles of a lumbering ladder frame chassis and crude non-independent suspension, is capable of. Chikmagalur sits in the middle of the Chandragiri ranges and is a thriving biodiversity hotspot, with coffee plantations flourishing side by side with thick jungles. And it makes for incredible off-roading country through rugged, beautiful and leech-infested terrain. Terrain that only your legs or an SUV will take you through.
When I first drove the Fortuner, I was impressed by it. I did say that it was the best you can buy in its segment today. But that's not because the Fortuner is outstanding or does anything spectacularly well. It's just a slight bit better than its competition. And what competition are we talking about? We are talking about SUVs that are at least 10 to 15 years old. In that sense, the Fortuner is only a slight evolution of what we already have. But there are some things that Toyota does do properly. And the first is quality. Everything fits together perfectly. There are no squeaks or rattles, and there will be no squeaks or rattles even after 50,000 kilometers. The second is space. Everybody is comfortable, and coupled with a good ride quality, this is a very good SUV to be chauffeur-driven in. Which I find quite bizarre. A chauffeur-driven SUV? Why would you want that?
Who is the most famous brand ambassador for coffee in the world? That would be the former Secretary General of the United Nations, Kofi Annan. Well, I'm sorry, a bad joke was needed at this point. Now this is the Endeavour. With the arrival of the 3-liter engine, the power problems of this SUV have been solved. The engine is torquey, and yesterday on the highway we were overtaking in 5th gear, where the other SUVs were having to regularly shift down to do the same thing. But there is a problem of size. You see, this is an American-sized SUV. Well, there this would probably be called a small SUV, but here it's a bit too big. India being a country of narrow spaces and small roads, it can become a management issue when you're trying to drive around.
While the Endeavour and Fortuner are comparatively new entrants to the SUV game, for decades now one brand, In fact, one name has been synonymous with butch, macho off-roaders in India. But inside the Pajero, Bert was feeling its age.
Mechanically, the Pajero is the perfect SUV. But these interiors, I mean, they were designed 30 years ago and nothing has changed. I mean, come on Mitsubishi, give this SUV a new lease of life, inject some freshness into these interiors. Creature comforts are non-existent and Mitsubishi needs to desperately make this fresher and certainly competitive.
Indian coffee is unique in that it is grown in the shade, unlike say Brazilian coffee. And that means you can't say where plantations end and forests start. But climb higher and you break through the tree line to enjoy some spectacular views. So far, so good. All four SUVs that dispatch the terrain with minimal fuss. In search of some difficult terrain which would really test these SUVs, we headed further into the jungles. But I couldn't help wondering how the XTrail, an acknowledged soft-roader, would fare.
Wow, that'll be your first reaction when you step into the XTrail from any of these other SUVs. It feels like a car. The way the interiors are put together, the quality, the driving environment, everything can give cars a run for their money. But the XTrail is not perfect. It might ride and handle like a car, but it's also as cramped as a car. There's barely enough room behind me and there are no third row of seats. It's a small compact SUV. You won't be able to bully your way through traffic with this.
If you were traveling through these trails every day, a chauffeur is not really an option, unless he has been to rally driving school. The surface is dirt, liberally mixed with loose stones and refuse. That's why Shumi was beginning to struggle a bit in the Endeavour.
The Endeavour, as you can see, is a pretty large vehicle. In this kind of terrain, it does cause problems. There are some really tight hairpins here, off-road of course, and the Endeavour can't make those U-turns because it's simply too large to take them. So you have to go up, reverse back, and then take a new line through it to make it. But there is a more serious problem than that. You see, the seat is not height adjustable. And it's pretty low. So while I'm trying to crane my neck and look over, what I do see is a long bonnet that stretches ahead and then some road in front of it. On a level patch, it's not so much of an issue. But when you're going uphill, the bonnet restricts your view. When you're going downhill, you only see the bonnet.
No such problems in the Pajero, where Bert was chugging along without any fuss. But he was thankful that the average speed stayed below 50 kilometers an hour.
The Pajero's 2.8 diesel is old school. It isn't contemporary with common rail diesel technology like in the XTrail or the Fortuner and even the Endeavour. It's very competent for going off-road and climbing hills and climbing almost everything. But then when you're out in the highway at 140 kilometers per hour, it struggles to keep up with the rest of these SUVs.
We arrived at our first water crossing of the trip, and not surprisingly, the Pajero was pressed into action to make the trip twice, dropping off both photographer and cameraman before crossing once again for the camera. Meanwhile, I had given up the comfort and composure of the Fortuner to put in my time in the Endeavour.
By the time you see this episode, Ford will have launched the new Endeavour in India. And compared to this Thunder Plus, it gets improved styling, slightly better interiors, and an automatic gearbox with a 3-liter engine. But otherwise, this SUV continues unchanged. Having been relieved of his ride, Shumi chose to take it easy through the tough terrain, and that meant jumping behind the truck-like wheel of the Pajero.
Driving the Pajero is like visiting another world. I do mean an older world, but I don't necessarily mean a worse one. This car is decades old. It's a legend. And if you look at the instruments and the way everything is laid out, the angle of the steering wheel, it definitely is an old car. But there's nothing wrong with that. It drives really well. It's more agile than any of these SUVs put together. It handles bad roads fantastically well, and it feels completely indestructible. More importantly, when the going gets tough, I think this is the car that gets going.
over jungle paths and splashing through puddles of mud is just the kind of thing SUVs are built for. On-road, their dynamics are frankly rubbish, especially when compared to cars that cost 20 lakh rupees. But off-road, they are transformed. All that height means great visibility, and even big rocks don't bother their undersides. The soft suspension and of course the 2-ton plus curb weight beats everything into submission.
The Endeavour is just massive. I mean, look at the size of this thing. But for all the real estate that it occupies on the road, inside the space is not all that good. And then there's ride quality. Not good at all when you consider that this thing can't handle. It's like the front has a mind of its own and the rear has a mind of its own.
And that's the absolute opposite of the XTrail, which Bert soon found out.
The big question is, why can't all SUVs in this segment be more like the Nissan XTrail? It's a very nice looking package, smart and handsome, and then of course it's complemented by its fantastic engine. It's both powerful yet frugal. Out on the highways it's fast and quick, and then out here in the hills the handling is excellent. The ride quality is brilliant as well. Steering is precise, the brakes are spot on, and then to complement all of that, you have this fantastic and funky interiors. But my only concern is just how serious an off-roader the Nissan X-Trail really is, which is exactly what you're going to find out.
The process of growing coffee has not changed much since the time of the early pioneers. Neither has the process of transforming ripe cherries into the aromatic liquid we love, and most of it is done at the plantations. The ripe cherries are first pulped to extract the beans, which are then dried, sorted, bagged and shipped off to the coffee clearing works, from where they are packaged, sold and finally ground to release the aroma. But how did coffee find its way to India?
We are a country of hero worshippers, but the heroes that we should worship are left ignored. Baba Budan, for instance. Legend has it that sometime in the 1600s, Baba Budan went to Mecca, and on his way back from Yemen, he picked up 7 coffee beans. Those coffee beans were planted in his backyard in the Chandragiri hills in Chikmagalur, and then they grew wild in these parts. Maybe because of the weather or the climate, they grew wild and they extended right from here in Karnataka, right down to Kerala. Coffee flourished in these parts, and that gave birth to coffee in India.
Having paid homage to Baba Budan, we set off once again through our final stretch of jungle trail. Our guide and rallyist Abhijit Pai had warned us that this would be the toughest part of the trip. Though as we drove along, we were in high spirits and feeling almost invincible, just the way a good SUV makes you feel.
I'm now in the Toyota Fortuner, and I have to say, it reminds me very strongly of the Ford Endeavour. Don't get me wrong, this is definitely, distinctively the better car of the two. But there is a little bit of the big truck hidden in both of them. This one is a few years ahead of that one. If you look at the ride quality of this car, it judders over things, which is exactly what the Ford Endeavour does, except that this has far superior body control, so it doesn't bug you so much. Handling wise, this is definitely superior. It's going where I pointed, although I could do with a little more feel from the steering wheel. On the whole, this is the fresher car, and this has a very big advantage over that car.
The only reason why the X-Trail is a bit more expensive than any of the other SUVs in this shootout is because you get a lot more equipment as well. For instance, you get hill descent control, you get heated seats, and then of course, there's the panoramic sunroof.
The X-Trail is the only one with ESP, and that not only makes it the safest to drive fast, but also works rather well in the mud, diverting power from spinning wheels to the ones with the most traction. But it also needs these fancy electronics because it lacks that essential component of a proper 4x4, a low ratio transfer box, something that the Pajero has as standard.
Retro? You bet. It's so old that cup holders weren't even invented back then. That's why I have no space for my bottle of water. But what you can do is check out this ashtray and put your bottle of water in that.
The Pajero was the first luxury SUV we could buy in India with proper diff locks, and what that does is ensure all 4 wheels run at the same speed. It is meant for mucky situations, but make sure your diffs are locked before you get into the muck. After that, a locking diff will not make any difference, and on tarmac, you should never drive with the diffs locked.
first and the biggest impact the Endeavour makes is with its size. And over and above, it's quite unwieldy too. While the steering's doing one thing, the brakes are doing another thing altogether. And then there's the ride quality. It's very, very bouncy. There are, however, two advantages the Endeavour enjoys. The first is its 3-litre common rail diesel engine. It's powerful and very, very torquey. But it's not very fuel efficient. On the flip side, you also get fantastic 4x4 abilities. It's got a proper low ratio gearbox, and that makes it a very competent off-roader.
The Endeavour and Fortuner share similar pickup-based underpinnings, but the Ford can't quite match the Toyota off-road. It is mainly hampered by its massive size, which makes it rather unwieldy, and the soft suspension has very aggressive rebound characteristics, and that makes it very bouncy and a bit uncontrollable. And when mated to tires well past their life, well, this is the result.
So there we are, stuck right and proper. Well, this actually has nothing to do with the Ford's abilities as an off-roader. It still is a very good 4x4 vehicle. But then, the problem is with the tires. The tires are quite bald. There isn't any tread left on them. And that makes driving on conditions like you can see very, very tricky. This is very slippery, and all the Ford Endeavour has done is just slipped off the dirt of this muck and slime into a rut, got beached, and that's it. We're stuck. I need a winch to get out of here now.
Luckily for us, Abhijit had brought along his Jeep, complete with a heavy-duty winch, which was promptly pressed into service. But let's face facts. A 2-ton SUV stuck axle deep in mud will prove hard work, even for a winch. And so it proved. And so, after an hour of a lot of winching, a lot of towing, a lot of pushing, and a lot of hamaligiri, we finally got the Endeavour out. These are my shoes. Bert, your shoes, come on. So Bert's practiced a lot for the Malaysian Rainforest Challenge. Maybe next year Ford will sponsor him. I don't think in an Endeavour though. And this is the other good thing about SUVs. In a car, all that towing, pushing, and hauling would have broken something very expensive. An SUV only needs a nice bath to be back to new. Punishment. That's what an SUV can take in buckets without breaking into a sweat. For the people pushing though, we ended up sweating buckets. It's been a long, tiring day. A long, tiring, but fun day. Just the kind of day that you would have if you're out testing SUVs in the environment they were meant to be tested in. And how do you wind down? With a piping hot cup of coffee. Not a regular ready-made nonsense, but good filter coffee from Chikmagalur. But coming back to our SUVs, now you saw what happened to the Endeavour. That's what happens when your SUV is just too big, too heavy, and too unwieldy to do any meaningful off-roading. The Pajero, on the other hand, now that's an SUV that gets better and better the worse the road becomes. On-road, the Pajero is just about average. Off-road, it is truly spectacular. What also turned out to be quite spectacular was the XTrail. Now, we didn't have too many expectations out of this soft-roader. It is, after all, the outsider in this test. But this soft-roader can off-road almost as well as these proper hardcore SUVs. And it does that while riding better and handling better. And it also has much better interiors that are a class above. In fact, the general consensus is that the XTrail should be the winner in this test. But then again, the XTrail is too cramped, too pricey, and you don't see too many Nissan dealers now, do you? What you do see a lot of are Toyota dealers. And what you will see a lot of are Fortuners. Much like the Innova on which it is based, the Fortuner 2 will go on forever. It's extremely well built and it will go through just about anything. In fact, it's almost as good off-road as the Pajero, which is saying a lot. On-road, it's only slightly better, which is not saying too much. Truth be told, we had very high expectations out of the Fortuner, and it hasn't met all those high expectations. It is only a slight step above the other SUVs in this test, but it does some things very well. Space, it's got extremely good space efficiency. It's also priced very well, and like I said, it'll go on forever. It is the sensible, practical, and intelligent choice in this segment.